Hello, welcome to this first presentation covering part 1 of vocabulary. If you wish to follow along and take notes, handouts have been provided for you online. Grab a pen and let's get started. So first off, what is vocabulary? Vocabulary is the knowledge of word meanings, as well as the knowledge of words. Stephen Stahl says, vocabulary knowledge is knowledge. The knowledge of a word not only implies a definition, but also implies how that word fits into the world. So vocabulary instruction is just not about knowing that word, but also being able to know the meaning and how that applies to the world as well. An individual with poor language has trouble recalling information, trouble using background knowledge, so knowledge they've already acquired, difficulty making inferences between things. They also have difficulty with multiple meaning words, words that have more than one meaning, figurative language, metaphors, analogies, and similes. And lastly, they have difficulty understanding humor in language. Something to note is that skilled reading by 3rd grade depends upon the development of extensive word knowledge vocabulary. So sometimes you will see vocabulary referred to as word knowledge. Also, we've known about the importance of vocabulary instruction for a long time. The National Reading Panel in 2000 said, "The importance of vocabulary knowledge has long been recognized in the development of reading skills. As early as 1924, researchers noted that growth in reading power means continuous growth in word knowledge." So, since about 1924, we've known that vocabulary knowledge affects reading skills and that it's important, and that if we work on vocabulary skills, it will aid in reading as well as comprehension. We'll come up on that in just a minute. So, did you know that beginning vocabulary predicts not only early word decoding and comprehension, but also later it predicts word decoding? So basically, beginning vocabulary predicts early word decoding and comprehension. Then from 3rd grade on, word decoding predicts later vocabulary development. So vocabulary is really important, and it has different inclinations as students progress in different grades. So what does this mean for practice? So implications for practice. Preschool students with limited vocabulary need support to improve oral vocabulary before beginning formal reading instruction. So basically, we need to instruct students on vocabulary before we can work with them on how to read. And useful strategies to accomplish this are storybook reading and language games. For our older students, or our upper grade students, continued attention to decoding and fluency and comprehension is necessary in order for students to continue to acquire vocabulary through their reading. So you see the shift there? In preschool, we're focusing on the vocabulary instruction before the reading instruction. And for the upper grades, we're still going to focus on vocabulary, but we're hoping they've already been taught how to read, which is an assumption that a lot of people make and isn't always true at times. But that isn't the topic of this presentation. So we're going to focus on vocabulary. So there are some characteristics of individuals struggling with reading vocabulary. First, they have difficulty comprehending both oral and written language. This means that they have limits in their vocabulary and their background knowledge. There's also difficulty remembering and retrieving words. As such, they're going to have trouble with integration and organization, and trouble connecting new words to prior knowledge. So for instance, maybe they knew a root word and then connecting that to new knowledge, they're going to have difficulty doing that because they're not going to be able to remember or retrieve that information or that word. And then lastly, if there's limited language, we over-rely on simple words. So Graves in 2000 came up with 4 components of an effective vocabulary program. The first one was wide or extensive independent reading to expand word knowledge. The second was instruction in specific words to enhance comprehension of text containing those words. The third, instruction in independent word learning strategies. And the fourth, word conscientiousness and wordplay activities to motivate and enhance learning. And a little later, we'll discuss word conscientiousness in a little more detail if you're not sure what that is. It was also in your Reading Rockets reading as well for this week. So Stahl in 2003, I quoted something from him earlier, also came up with 4 components of effective vocabulary instruction, but his are just a little bit different than Graves. Multiple exposures to words, thoughtful encounters with words, reading and talking about words, and lastly, using words in speech and writing. So as you can see, we have 2 researchers, same topic, effective vocabulary instruction or programs, and a little bit different on the components that they think are needed. So with that, the National Reading Panel says, there is no single best way to teach vocabulary. So if you were to look it up, it's not going to say, you need to teach vocabulary this way all the time. It's not going to happen because direct and indirect methods of vocabulary instruction are recommended. By direct, we mean we want to intentionally teach about the vocabulary. So we specifically want to instruct students on the vocabulary word itself. So we're instructing students on that word. And indirect. By indirect, we mean students acquire vocabulary indirectly, usually in real-world situations without direct teaching. For example, this could be by reading aloud to themselves. Students can gain vocabulary in the books they are reading. Words must also be seen and used multiple times and in multiple contexts. And language-rich environments foster incidental word learning for vocabulary. So we want lots of language in the environment. We also want to teach students some word learning strategies. So first of all, we want to teach them how to use a dictionary. Teach students how to use a dictionary and how to select an appropriate definition for a word. So if a word has multiple definitions, we want them to be able to select the appropriate one at the appropriate time. And that's a skill you can teach them to do. Morphemic analysis. We want to teach students how to derive a word's meaning by analyzing its parts, the morphemes. So by looking at the root words, the prefixes, and the suffixes, a student should be able to determine the word's meaning, even if they don't already know what the word means. Cognate awareness. For English language learners, that's what ELL stands for. Teaching cognates helps teach similar meanings for those learning a second language. So for students learning a second language, it's usually really difficult for them, especially for meanings, because in their own language, a word might mean something different in English than it does for them. Let's say their first language is Spanish. So for example, gratitude in English means the same as it does in Spanish. I'm not going to pronounce the Spanish version of that for you, because I am not a Spanish speaker. And lastly, contextual analysis. We want to teach students how to infer the meaning of a word by using the context clues from the surrounding words. So if they read a sentence, a passage, student doesn't know what a word means, we want to teach them how to look at those words around that specific word, and then they should be able to infer the meaning of the word with those context clues. And this can be extremely helpful, especially when a student has no idea what the word means. We also want to keep in mind that students need to see a word more than once before they are able to remember its meaning. Therefore, multiple exposures in multiple contexts are best. Now, Stahl said, this does not mean mere repetition or drill of the word. So basically, we don't want to be drilling a student on the vocabulary word over and over. That's not what we mean by multiple exposures in multiple contexts. Instead, we want to give students opportunities to encounter words in more than one context multiple times. So maybe we're using different teaching methods, some direct, some indirect, also different activities, to give them lots of different opportunities in multiple contexts and different times. So word conscientiousness, I alluded to earlier. Basically, the more we know about a word, the more easily and fluently we will be able to read it. Graves said, if we can get students interested in playing with words and language, then we are at least halfway to the goal of creating the sort of word-conscious students who will make words a lifetime interest. So basically, what is word conscientiousness? It's an awareness of a word's usage and multiple meanings. It's curiosity about words and their meanings. And lastly, it's an interest in increasing knowledge of words. So when we teach vocabulary instruction, we want to look at a robust approach to vocabulary instruction. This means we are using multiple mediums. We are directly explaining the meanings of the words, along with thought-provoking, playful, and interactive follow-up. So examples would be, number 1, we'd select the right words to teach. Number 2, we develop child-friendly definitions for these words. Of course, definitions you get off the internet or from a dictionary are more for adults than for children. We want to engage children in interesting, challenging, and playful activities in which children learn to access the meanings of words in multiple contexts. And lastly, we want to find a way to devote more time during the day to vocabulary instruction. So, I bet you are wondering, how many words should a student gain in their vocabulary in a year? Well, let's go back. So Beck, McEwen, and Kukin in 2002 suggest that a student's vocabulary should increase by 2,000 to 3,000 words a year. They also suggest that about 400 of those should be taught directly. So if we're supposed to teach words directly, how do we identify what words are the most important to teach? Well, there's criteria for identifying possible words to study. You could first ask yourself some questions. How generally useful is the word you're trying to teach? Is it a word that students are likely to encounter in other texts? Will it be of use to students in describing their own experiences? Is it a word that students do not know completely and accurately? Is the word tier 2 or tier 3? And I'll show you what this means in the next slide. And how does the word relate to other words or to ideas that students know or have been learning? So when looking at, should I teach this word to a student, we want to think about these questions. They're really important. And also, what does the word bring to a text or situation? So there are 3 tiers of vocabulary instruction. Tier 1 is basic high-frequency words. They do not require direct instruction. For example, clock, baby, and happy. Tier 2, these are words employed by mature language writers. Instruction usually has the most benefits in learning these words, so we want to teach these words. Coincidence, absurd, indigenous. And Tier 3, low-frequency words that apply to specific content or context. We want to teach these when we're teaching specific content or passages, like an isotope, a peninsula, those kind of things. So here's our tiers. The first tier is on the bottom because it's the basic. The next tier is in the middle, and the top tier is in the top. just so you can see how those are organized. So Tier 1 words, again, are basic words that appear in most children's vocabulary, those without language delays. Tier 2 are frequently occurring words, but they're central to comprehension and are understood by most language users without language delays. These words are great for explicit targeted instruction. And Tier 3, usually low frequency, they're specific words to a certain field, maybe science or social studies. So here's another example, just kind of a table for you so you can see. We have kind of word on the top, explanation, and then examples. As I said, Tier 1, basic words, well known, often used. Tier 2, high frequency words used by mature language users across several content areas. And Tier 3, low frequency words, often limited to specific content areas. Maybe science, maybe social studies, those kind of things. So here are some more examples of words by tier specific so you can see them. So in Tier 1 basic, we have the words home, dog, happy, see, come, again, find, go, look. Tier 2, analyze, approach, role, consistent, major, require, significant, vary, interpret. And I'm not going to waste your time reading the third column. Just remember that those are content specific. We only want to teach those when we're studying specific content. So say if you were our first two, volcano and lava, studying about volcanoes, it'd be very important to introduce those vocabulary words. But if you weren't studying volcanoes, it probably wouldn't be a good idea. So when we think about vocabulary instruction, we want to gear our instruction towards those Tier 2 words. And this usually has a rich impact on verbal competency and acquiring those vocabulary words. We want a goal of 400 words a year, and if we use that robust instruction that I talked about earlier, this often leads to effective gains in vocabulary. We also want new words. New words must be learned in relation to other associated words. So we can't just teach them for no reason. They need to be associated to other words as well. Or for instance, if you're teaching about volcanoes and you need to introduce those Tier 3 words, you can. And deep learning occurs in repeated practice and use of the word in oral language. And also written as well. So not just trying to memorize it, actually using it in its context. So when we're selecting Tier 2 words, which is in the middle of our little triangle or pyramid, some questions to ask yourself is it useful? Meaning, is the word useful? Will the student encounter the word again? Does the word relate to other words or ideas? And lastly, will it enhance further learning? So I have an activity here for you. You're going to read the passage below, and then you're going to underline the words you think are Tier 2 words for 4th grade. And it's okay if you're not quite sure. This is just kind of get you thinking about different words. And I have provided you with a copy of this, so you don't have to write it. You can just get that copy and take a few minutes to do that and underline. So let me repeat the directions. Here's a passage. You're going to read it and underline the 10 Tier 2 words in this passage. And then on the next slide, I'll show you the answer key. So you can pause your recording at this time until you've read the passage and underlined your 10 words that are Tier 2 words. And if you need to go back and review what a Tier 2 word is, feel free to. Alright, we're back. If you haven't quite finished, make sure you pause it, because I'm going to show you what the answers are for your 10 Tier 2 words. So here's the passage again, but I've underlined the words like you should have. So comment, occurrence, tended, mention, emerging, admit, haunting, reality, sinister, and fortune are the 10 tier 2 words. I'll repeat them again, and you can also see them on your screen. Comment, occurrence, tended, mention, emerging, admit, haunting, sinister, and fortune. If you need to pause the video to see which ones you got correct or incorrect, feel free to. Now I'm going to show you the rationale for why these words are considered tier 2 words that you should give students instruction in. Put them all up here for you. So admit and fortune, these are familiar words, but they're not basic words, so that's why they need to be taught. Tended and reality, they're used in the story in a way that is key to understanding, so it's really important to teach them. And haunting, while it might be familiar to them because of Halloween, it's used in a slight twist, and it's not really related to Halloween. Comment and occurrence, mention and emerging, these are useful across a range of contexts. That should be context, I'm sorry. Context. So, or different contents. And sinister is a powerful word with emotional impact for the passage, so it's really important to teach. So what does it mean to know a word? We have different levels of word knowledge. We have unknown, meaning that the student has never heard it, and they can't use or define it. Known, they can recognize it, but they don't use the word. And they own it, meaning they use the word with confidence and can define it for someone else. So here's a list of words. You might know their meaning, you might not know their meaning. This is also helpful for students. You can give them a list of words that you're going to be teaching them and check their vocabulary knowledge in the process before you start instruction. Because maybe there's a word you expected students to know and they really don't know. So you expect them to own it. However, that word's really unknown to them. They've never heard it and they can't use or define it. So this is what you'd want to set up for students. You'd have your word in your left-hand column. Then can they define it? You could either maybe have them just a check mark or have them actually write the definition in there for them. Have they heard it before? That would probably just be a check mark. Have they heard it? Or maybe what context have they heard it before? So maybe they could write a sentence. So, like a sentence, for instance, my mom bought a chiffon dress. That could be in the heard it column. If you want them to write a sentence about it, then maybe they could be able to define it. So maybe in that instance, it would be cloth or a type of material, and they should be able to define it. And then if they just don't know what it is, then they put a check mark in that column. So this is just an interesting way for students to be able to check their vocabulary knowledge. If you want to check yours right now, feel free to. But it's just an example. So next time, we're going to have vocabulary part 2. And in this, we're going to focus on more specific activities for vocabulary. So I'll give you lots of examples. Morphology and how it's used in vocabulary, like teaching roots and suffixes. And then how Greek-based words. So how teaching Greek-based words can help with vocabulary instruction. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me.